apparent winner of the election, formally starting the transition of power after President Trump spent weeks testing the boundaries of American democracy. Emily Murphy, the top official in General Services Administration in charge of making millions of dollars in transition funding available to the winner of the presidential election, said that President-elect Joe Biden would be receiving those funds. And in her letter, she said she was freeing up $7,300,000 to the Biden campaign to aid in this transition. Outside the realm of national security and foreign policy, Biden is expected to choose Janet Yellen as the first woman to become Treasury Secretary. She was nominated by President Obama to lead the Federal Reserve, the first woman in that position, and served from 2014 to 18. Joe Biden named former Secretary of State John Kerry as special climate envoy. His transition team saying this is a sign that Biden is putting the issue at the center of his foreign policy. Former Secretary of State John Kerry helped broker the landmark Paris Agreement and signed it on behalf of the United States, a decision subsequently reversed by President Trump. Joe Biden's picked to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, a low-key veteran foreign officer reflects the president-elect's intent to return to a more traditional role at the world body, as well as offer an olive branch to a beleaguered diplomatic corps. If confirmed by the Senate, Linda Thomas Greenfield would be neither the first African-American nor the first woman, nor even the first African-American woman to serve as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, but she's a groundbreaking diplomat nonetheless. President-elect Joe Biden nominating members of his cabinet. The names of the list not unexpected and include foreign policy and national security experts, mostly Washington insiders and experience holders. Anthony Blinken is Secretary of State, Jake Sullivan is National Security Advisor, Alejandro Mayorkas his Homeland Security, and Avril Haines, Director of National Intelligence, along with, of course, his Chief of Staff, Ron Klain. President Trump agreed to allow the transition process to begin, ending weeks of speculation. President Trump's legal team, though, said it would continue its legal strategy to challenge the results of the presidential election after Michigan officials certified results showing that President-elect Joe Biden had won their state. The Michigan State Board of Canvassers voted to certify the state's election results, formally granting President-elect Joe Biden the state's 16 more electoral votes. Remember last week when Elon Musk, the chief executive officer of electric car company Tesla, zoomed past Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg to become the third richest person in the world? Well, this week, he has become the second richest person in the world. He toppled Bill Gates as the world's second richest person after a further surge in Tesla's share price. The 49-year-old entrepreneur's net worth rose by $7.2 billion to $127.9 billion. He added $100.3 billion to his net worth this year. The United States has recorded its biggest weekly rise in COVID-19 deaths since August, increasing 32% from the previous week to average about 1,500 people per day. New cases rose 13%, an average of more than 168,000 per day. And ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday this Thursday, at least 23 states have announced new restrictions to try to slow the spread of the virus, but so far only New Mexico has issued a stay-at-home order. In North Dakota, the hardest-hit state on a per-capita basis, mandated masks starting the 14th of this month, but another 14 states still do not require them. The World Health Organization considers positive test rates about 5% concerning, and out of the 50 states here, 26 had tested positive rates about 10% last week. State and local officials nationwide imposing new coronavirus restrictions and pleading with the public in an increasingly desperate attempt to stop the explosive spread of the disease as many Americans resist the calls to limit gatherings and travel heading into the holidays. The nation is entering a very vulnerable period that could see a number of deaths rise rapidly, said Dr. Anthony Fauci. U.S. holiday travelers defying those warnings. Millions of Americans appear to be disregarding public health warnings and traveling ahead of the Thanksgiving holidays. 2 million people flew out on Friday and Saturday last week ahead of Thanksgiving, despite experts strongly urging against travel for the holiday. Ted Cruz has been criticized for urging Texans to continue with their Thanksgiving plans while the state's morgues overflow with COVID victims and people queue for hours outside a Dallas food bank. His tweet was liked over 90,000 times and retweeted almost 30,000 times, but coming amid a worsening COVID crisis in his state, many were not amused. Texas has almost 1.1 million cases of COVID confirmed and over 20,000 deaths. A flurry of new restrictions by state and local officials have been declared over the last week, and over half the country is a red zone where the virus is currently rampant. Mexico's Roman Catholic Church announced the cancellation of what's considered the world's largest Catholic pilgrimage for the Virgin of Guadalupe due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and Mexican authorities have recovered 113 bodies and additional human remains from a secret grave outside the western city of Guadalajara. A Russian warship caught the U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyer USS John McCain operating illegally in Russia's territorial waters in the Sea of Japan, but chased it off, according to Russia's defense ministry in Moscow. And the Kremlin said Russia's healthcare system was under heavy strain as authorities reported a record 491 deaths linked to COVID-19, and the infections continue to surge. Turkey and Russia at odds over Ankara's wish to set up an independent military observation post on Azeri territory. Clashes between Kurdish fighters and Turkey-backed opposition gunmen in northern Syria have left at least 11 fighters dead in some of the most intense fighting in weeks between the two sides. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he spoke with the Crown Prince of Bahrain and would visit the Gulf states soon, a month after the two countries established formal diplomatic relations. And Saudi Arabia denied Israeli media reports of landmark talks between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman during a visit by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo a day after Prime Minister Netanyahu's reported trip to Saudi Arabia. Israel's health ministry added the kingdom to its list of coronavirus green countries, exempting returning travelers from quarantine. Houthi rebels in Yemen have claimed responsibility for a cruise missile attack against an oil facility in Jeddah. And Afghan President Ashraf Ghani urging the international community to continue supporting Afghanistan, even as he acknowledged that donors are likely to cut aid under the strain of COVID-19. Top officials, including the UN Secretary General and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, were taking part in a largely virtual pledging conference for Afghanistan today, the latest effort to drum up aid and support for a country where Taliban fighters are making inroads against the government. Paris police under government orders to explain themselves after officers were filmed tossing migrants out of tents while evacuating a makeshift camp in the French capital. And the United Kingdom announced reducing the current mandatory 14-day quarantine for international passengers to 5 days from the 15th of December if a test taken 5 days after arrival proves negative. Japan paused its domestic go-to travel promotion campaign in 2 cities following sharp rises in COVID-19 infections. And ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. Tensions are rising around Thailand's pro-democracy protests, with police shooting 6 people last week and using tear gas and water cannons on the streets of Bangkok. A 2-star Navy admiral overseeing U.S. military intelligence in the Asia-Pacific region has made an unannounced visit to Taiwan. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen vowing to defend the democratic island's sovereignty with the construction of a new fleet of domestically developed submarines. And in a new book, Pope Francis for the first time calls China's Muslim Uyghurs a persecuted people, something human rights activists have been urging him to do for years. China's latest trip to the moon is another milestone in the Asian powerhouse's slow but steady ascent to the stars. And hundreds of flights at one of China's busiest airports cancelled today as Shanghai raced to bring a local coronavirus outbreak under control. China recording 22 new cases, up from 11 cases yesterday. And China is likely commissioning more squadrons of a multi-role strike fighter on the border with India as the militaries of the two countries dig in and deploy latest weaponry along the line of actual control amid the ongoing border face-off. India's recalibration of its ties with China continues apace even as the situation along the Himalayan frontier remains tense. India unveiled new development initiatives for Afghanistan, including a dam to supply water to Kabul and 150 community projects worth $80 million, even as it called for an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire in the war-torn country. The talismanic Virat Kohli and Ravichandran Ashwin were today nominated for the coveted ICC Men's Player of the Decade award, with the Indian captain featuring in all 5 men's categories for his incredible run in the last 10 years. Prime Minister Modi held a meeting with chief ministers of all states and union territories today to review COVID-19 situations, where he asked them to start working on cold storage facilities for the vaccine. And Union Home Minister Amit Shah asked these chief ministers of all the states and union territories witnessing a surge in the case of coronavirus disease to ensure that COVID-19 mortality rate comes down below 1%. There seems to be no end in sight for Delhi's most severe wave of coronavirus infections, and worried by the prospect of a post-Diwali surge, the Maharashtra government has imposed stringent restrictions on people travelling to the state from New Delhi, Rajasthan, Gujarat and Goa, which have recently seen a spike in numbers. Severe cyclonic storm Nivar is expected to bring heavy rainfall to Chennai when it makes landfall between Malappuram and Karaikal tomorrow evening. President of the People's Alliance for Gupkar Declaration, Farooq Abdullah, today said that the alliance will fight for the restoration of Jammu and Kashmir's special status. Information Minister Shibli Faraz in Islamabad said there were no restrictions in place on former Premier Nawaz Sharif and his sons and former Finance Minister Ishaq Dar, barring them from coming to Pakistan to attend the funeral of the PMLN Supremo's mother. Prominent lawyer Naeem Bukhari, who led the legal team of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf chief Imran Khan in the Panama Papers leak case, will head the state-run Pakistan Television as its chairman. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all that I have in the news for you on this 24th.